My name is Megan Thompson, and I'm the Director of Education and Outreach for Cleveland Opera Theater. Opera 101 is for all ages, so every day or every weekday we discuss one aspect of opera to help our listeners better understand the art form. And if you have any questions, you can either submit them right here in the comments or you can email them to us so we can answer them in a future Opera 101 session. So today's question is one that comes up quite often, and it's what is the difference between opera and musical theater? And this is definitely a tricky question to answer sometimes. So we've discussed in previous Opera 101 sessions that opera as an art form is a staged work that is performed memorized with costumes and lights and sets, but it's all sung. So that's great and fine. Most of the time, that's a really good working definition. However, then we start getting into some of our musical theater, and the question is, well, Phantom of the Opera is all sung, so does that make that one an opera? And usually folks say, no, it's not an opera. Well, why not? We just said that a staged work that is all memorized and sung through should be an opera. This one's a staged work that's sung through. The biggest difference, definitively, is the style of singing utilized in opera versus musical theater. So in opera, we use a very specific voice. It's very resonant. It is all produced in a healthy way. And it's what we call often our head voice. This is the style where we have a lifted, soft palate. We're creating a lot of space in our head and we're really resonating. You'll also notice that in opera, we don't use microphones when we're singing. We sing very naturally because of this headspace that we're using and the resonance that we're using. We actually don't need microphones to be heard over the orchestra and to be heard throughout the house. However, in musical theater, for the most part, our vocal production is actually coming more from our chest. You'll hear it referred to as chest production, chest voice, belting. All of these are referring to the style that is coming more from a lower production point. So there are a lot of arguments on this. You can definitely belt in a healthy way, particularly those who have a voice that's a little bit more chest-centric, that's already a little more naturally suited to chest voice. However, the trouble comes in that a lot of folks try to mimic this sound in a not so healthy way. And that's when we start getting into some trouble. You'll start hearing people talking about problems like vocal nodes. And it means basically that there's some extra stress being put on the vocal cords that really shouldn't be there, and it's creating some problems. Now, we also start looking into a lot of the more modern operas, especially some of the really avant-garde and really like boundary pushing things. There's some things out there if you start Googling modern opera that really start pushing, because you're like, well, that doesn't sound like the traditional Puccini I'm used to listening to. And that's also fine. And that's another fine line. So in the end, sometimes we have to just accept that if a composer wants it to be an opera, but also wants to have something sung in a specific way to evoke a certain feeling or to illustrate a certain character in a certain way, we have to kind of just roll with it sometimes. The other kind of gray area in all of this is you'll hear folks refer to like rock operas or pop operas. And this is, again, where maybe it fits all of the requirements of opera. It might even be a traditional opera like Carmen, but it's being sung in a new way. So for instance, Beyonce did a version of Carmen that was very pop styled, but it was the original music in most of it. So you have this like weird crossover, like gray period here. The other one that gets a little interesting in that gray area is when an opera company decides to take on something that's usually sung in a more traditional musical theater style, but they do it in a classical way. So a lot of like Rodgers and Hammerstein productions really lend themselves well to this, like Carousel, for instance, because they can be sung in a very classical way, still sound very enjoyable, the storyline still comes across. And so you have opera singers singing in an operatic fashion, but they're singing music that is very traditionally musical theater. So the short answer is it's, very subjective as to what counts. Now, the other thing that really gets a little more wishy-washy and gray area, this is where I have a lot of fun with it, is you start seeing more and more musicals that are ending up on the Broadway stage that are actually based on operas. So, we had Baz Luhrmann do Aida, for instance. We have, Rent, which is La Boheme. We actually had a production of La Boheme go on musical theater stage, on Broadway stage. So you have these musicals that are based in opera, that are rooted in the operatic tradition, but they've been updated to maybe a pop opera or a rock opera type format now. And who's really famous for this? I had already mentioned Phantom of the Opera, but we've got Andrew Lloyd Webber, who just loved to write these sung through musical theater pieces that in many ways echoed the traditions of opera, but are definitely solidly in the musical theater repertoire. So I definitely encourage you to go listen across genres. You don't have to ever stick to just one, and appreciate all of the beauty that every genre has to offer. So for future reference, again, you can submit your questions here in the comments, or you can email them to us, and we will each be answering different questions each day. So I know tomorrow our assistant conductor is going to be back, and then Wednesday, Scott Skiba, our executive artistic director, will be on, and then I think later this week, Domenico and I will both be back too. So tune in every day at 12:15 to hear more Opera 101 tidbits. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you visit clevelandoperatheater.org to sign up for our mailing list and to view all upcoming Opera for All online events, including tonight's Opera Club, in which we're going to discuss Gounod's Romeo et Juliet at 6 o'clock. See you soon.